What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Dylan Talks Tone. Welcome to the Just Gonna Say It podcast. That's usually on Tuesday, but yesterday was a holiday, and I figured I would give you all the day off, and I took the day off too, and it was amazing. And so, welcome to the podcast. We're going to talk about the news first. We'll start doing that every week. So we'll go through the gear news really quick. I want to thank all my Patreon supporters who support the channel. That's what makes content possible, and reviews and that sort of stuff, because we don't get a lot of free stuff around here, so we have to buy it. So thank you so much for all the Patreon support. I've been trying to get over there every day and answer questions, and also content every week. So yeah, we'll check that out, as well as some of the links below in the news. If you use those links, it helps out the channel. We got a couple of really cool new products this week, and then we're going to get the last story in the news is actually our thumbnail, and we're going to chat about import guitars. So we'll chat about that in just a few minutes. Also, DylanTalksTone.com. That's where you get pickups, because that's my real job. We make pickups around here. All right. First of all, let's talk about Gibson. Leo Scala. If you recall, about a year ago, I want to say, Gibson announced these special Leo Scala. He's a high-end luthier, kind of collaborations. They had some V's, I think, and they sold for like $50,000 a piece. I actually got to see one when I was in Nashville. They're really, really cool guitars. Anyway, those guitars sold right away. So now they have some new ones. They've got a Les Paul, an SG, a Theodore, and a V. If you want one of these guitars, you have to call Gibson directly at the Gibson showroom up there and talk to them about it. And that's how you get those guitars. I imagine they're not going to be cheap, and I imagine they're going to sell out as fast as they have been announced. I think they actually were announced last week, or late last week. So those things will probably sell out pretty quickly. In other news, the other thing I want to talk about this week is the TC Electronic. These things are their AmpWorks modelers. And so they've got basically a Fender Deluxe Reverb, a Vox AC30, and a Marshall JTM 45 kind of tone in a pedal. And so this is going to give you USB connectivity. It's going to give you a pedal board mountable deal. It's going to give you a 1/4-inch DI output, 3-band EQ, and it's basically just going to give you kind of an amp in a box modelers. The cool part about this, I put a link to these in the description. These darn things are $150 a piece. So if you are not aware, TC Electronic has made themselves a pretty good living with the Sans amp stuff for a long time, and that stuff's been really good. So I'm assuming that progress, just like anywhere else and anything else, is going to be pretty awesome, and these things are going to be awesome. Quick question. Let's see. Could I get a similar sound to your classic fives by using a low value cap with your hot fives? Probably not. Nope. They're wound completely differently. So yeah, there's a couple of new things that have popped up in the news. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of the main subject for the day of the podcast too, is the problem with import guitars. So, and also the not really, but maybe collectability of the Fender Squier Stratosonic, the one that I just had in here last week with the Epiphone on the bottom of the bridge. Apparently, they weren't supposed to go out like that with Epiphone on the bottom of the bridge. People at Fender didn't know that that was actually happening. And you might say, how is that possible? Well, contrary to popular belief, and I know that there's going to be details that are a little murky in here, and you're going to get in, people will get in the comments and challenge me about what I know about this stuff, but I'm just going to tell you that we're just going to talk about it. So, you have these companies in Indonesia that are factories that manufacture guitars for Fender, PRS, Kramer, Schecter, all of these companies, right? Fender has in Indonesia alone, I believe 21 or 23 different factories in Indonesia alone, manufacturing guitar related products. Some of those factories, and what you need to understand is these factories are not always actually owned by Fender. They are a factory who takes jobs on from other companies. Cortec is another example. So, PRS has its own wing at Cortec. Cortec, where they make like the SEs and stuff. Cortec is an independent company, largely or is independent from PRS. PRS obviously is like, hey, we're going to invest a bunch of money in your factory if you keep this part of it exclusive to us. So that's a thing. Yes, it is. However, not every deal is like that. So a lot of these factories are just, we have factory space, we make guitars, and whoever says, hey, we want you to build 100,000 guitars, that's what we're going to do. So sometimes somebody might make Epiphone stuff. Sometimes they might make Schecter stuff. Sometimes they might make Kramer stuff. Sometimes they might make Squiers. Sometimes they might make a whole bunch of stuff. Also, when you have parts crossover in design, for instance, this bridge on this Squier, we all joke about it being a Les Paul special or an Epiphone special in Fender clothes, right? Therefore, that factory that's going to make that guitar, they'll just source the parts that say, hey, I need this kind of bridge. And it just so happened that bridge had Epiphone printed on the bottom because it's the same part number that can be used on an Epiphone. And so it ended up having Epiphone on the bottom. Now, Fender didn't like that very much. So they went ahead and said, you know what? We want to make sure that never happens again. So they're probably going to have them make a bunch with an Epiphone not on the bottom and not take it out of the exact same parts bin. But contrary to what we think, a lot of these Indonesian guitars are basically parts bin guitars. We can even talk about the wood that they're made of also. A lot of them are parts bin guitars. Let's see if I missed any questions before we move on to the next thing, because we'll talk about wood as well. So yeah, wood is the same thing. So, for example, and I know this for sure to be true with Indonesian Squiers, that Fender, now let me just say, it depends on the job. So it depends, and when I say job, I mean guitar model. So when Fender goes to the Indonesian Squier factory and says, hey, I want you to make these Stratasonics, they've got to be 429, and they have to be mahogany-ish. They could be NATO, they could be Okium, they could be whatever. It doesn't really matter as long as they sort of look the same and feel the same and are about the same weight. It is up to the factory. The factory actually sources all those parts and then submits that to Fender and says, will this work? And Fender says, yeah, this will work. So I'm not going to say this is true every time, but I know it has been true a lot of times, is that the spec that you see on the website, they don't know until after the guitar's like done. It's not, they didn't go and say, okay, we really need the tone of Okium. Can you please tap test some Okium so that we can make sure that it's not that. It's, we want the guitar to be $429. Okay, well, if you want it to be $429, it's going to have these pots, these pickups, and it's going to have to be made out of Okium for you to hit that price point. End of story. Well, we want it to be made out of mahogany. Okay, well, it's not going to be $429. It's going to be $599. Well, we can't have that. Okay, well, then you're going to have to make it out of oakum. So it's kind of one of those things. Those guitars are built to a price. And that's, I don't want to say it's a problem of import guitars, but a lot of times those things are basically just, well, they're built to a price. This is why the low price guitars are in their own class when it comes to, and oftentimes for these conversations, people always ask me, what do you think about Sire? What do you think about What do you think about blah, 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 all these guitars? I don't care. And here's why. They all come from the same place, basically. There's some factories in China, there's some factories in Taiwan, and there's some factories in Korea. Now, the Korean ones, obviously, that's on a little different level, but it doesn't really matter. The quality of the instrument is going to be kind of the same. These ones that come out of this region are going to be pretty much the same. These ones that come out of this region are going to be pretty much the same. And these ones that come out of this region are going to be pretty much the same. And they're all handled the same way. So I don't care what my Squier Telly is made out of. I don't care about that stuff because we don't have a choice, because it's built to a price. So if they're kind of just, they are what they are, then you just have to decide whether that guitar is cool. This is why all of these cheap guitars are just kind of pick a flavor. Which one do you like? And the pickups are probably going to come from one of a few different factories, except for like PRS. PRS has their own pickup plant at Cortex. So there's a couple of brands like PRS. But for the most part, all these foreign guitars, it's like there's going to be some pickup plants in China. There's going to be, what's the one in Korea? Artec. And there's going to be a couple of Indonesian pickup plants. They're just kind of placeholders. People get on me all the time like, well, you're just going to change the pickups out of the guitar, and how can I trust your review because you just say that you don't like the pickups? Well, it's kind of because they're just all the same. They're sort of, they're all the $5 pickups that you buy on eBay. It's the same stuff, just kind of over and over and over and over again. And they might have a hot wind and a not as hot wind, but not usually. Usually they're pretty much kind of all fall in the same ballpark and same department. So, you know, a Reverend P90 is pretty much par for the course, the same as an Epiphone P90. And I know, because I take them out and I look at them and I measure them and I check them out, and they're kind of just all the same. So, you know, of course, then you have plastic bobbin stuff from some Squiers, which they're not doing that as much anymore. And you have, you know, a humbucker in a Kramer and a humbucker in a Schecter, and they're kind of the same. Now, when you get into the $1,000 guitar or the $899 guitar, that might be a little bit different story. Schecter will use Schecter designed pickups that they've actually put some thought into. But when it really comes from the Far East stuff and the lower price stuff, it's just they're just kind of placeholders. They're just kind of all the same. And so, you know, doesn't Epiphone have their own factory in China? They do. They do have their own factory in China. However, the parts for those. So here's the thing about this, though. That doesn't mean that there are very few companies. American Fender is one. Martin is another. There are very few companies that have a very vertical manufacturing process. Ernie Ball Music Man is another, where they actually like machine their own bridges, and like they have a machine shop to make their own bridges and stamp their own metal parts and all that kind of stuff. On the Indonesian side, they're all parts guitars. All these things are basically just a bunch of parts casters. That's all they are. So yes, Epiphone has their own factory in China where they cut the wood and they put the guitar together, but they all order their bridges and their tuners and their hardware all comes from a separate Chinese company who may supply more than one guitar company. So in the situation that we're talking about now, you've got a separate third-party, non-Epiphone, non-Fender. It's just called Chinese Guitar Hardware Company.com, okay, or whatever it's called, and they make hardware for a lot of cheap guitars. So probably lots of cheap guitars. And this is why when Fender said, "Hey, I need some Epiphone type bridges," they pulled them out of a bin that they had at ChineseGuitarParts.com and they sent them off to Fender instead of sending them off to Epiphone because Fender needed some too, and they ended up having Epiphone stamped in the bottom of them. Fender didn't like that, so they probably went to ChineseGuitarParts.com and said, "Hey, yo," or whatever it's called. I don't care. I don't know. But, hey, we need our own that don't say Epiphone on the bottom anymore. So they're going to have to make like another parts bin that is basically the same bridge. It just doesn't have it stamped in the bottom anymore. But all those parts are not vertically manufactured at Epiphone. Just because you buy an Epiphone doesn't mean that those parts are made at Epiphone. They're made at a whole nother third-party Chinese company. So, that's how that works. That's a... And, I guess the reason I bring this up is because I get a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of grief. I don't want to be negative about it because I don't really care. Play whatever guitar you want. I think it's awesome. And obviously we make our living modding these guitars, right? So it's fun. It's like we always have a less expensive guitar around here to mod because it's what we do and it's fun. So I'm not talking down on the guitars themselves, but what I'm trying to bring a wider understanding of all this Epiphone and all this Squier and all these import guitars, because a lot of people are constantly in the comments on our YouTube videos asking me, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about this? Well, let me tell you. I'll tell you exactly what I think. Below about $600. Okay, no. Below an SE Silver Sky, below an $800 Kramer, below an $800 Schecter, anything that's not made in Korea. So anything that's made to be less expensive than about $800 in Indonesia or China, to me, you could throw it all in a bucket and it's all the same to me. I don't care. And to me, it's pick a flavor, pick your favorite color, plan to replace your pickups and your knobs and your switches. Unless you get that guitar and you're the type of guitar player that enjoys it the way it is. And that's totally cool. Like you should love what you have. So just choose one and enjoy it. But just know that the reason I don't have an opinion on them, especially on this channel, is because they kind of are all this big mishmash of the same thing. I'll tell you, the last time we went to the NAMM show, one of the things Leslie and I were walking around and I'm like, there's this guitar brand I've never heard of, and here it is right over here. And then here's this other guitar brand that I've never heard of, and here it is right over here. And here's another one, and here's another one. And there's like 9 or 10 or 11 of these different guitar brands. And I start looking around and I'm like, wait a minute. That guitar and that guitar are basically the same, just with a different name printed on the peg head. And that guitar are basically the same. And that guitar and that guitar, you can obviously tell are made in the same factory, even though they're a little bit different, because you can just see by the way the necks are carved and various stuff. And you're like, oh, that one and that one has really specific features and they share this thing in common. And you start to realize, you're like, wait a minute, all of this stuff is exactly the same. And all 12 brands come out of 2 or 3 factories. And they just make a couple little tweaks and they slap their name on them, and that's whatever brand of guitar it is, and that's what you're buying. And so once it gets to that level, I don't care. I and I don't think you should either. I don't think you should. I guess let's talk about it in this context, in a very positive context. I don't think you should worry about it. I think at these price points, I think you should just pick your flavor, pick your color, pick the design, pick the body shape, whatever you want at these price points. Now we're talking, and just get the guitar. And if it needs a little fretwork, do the fretwork. And if it needs new pickups, put new pickups in it. If it's fine, it's fine. And don't worry about people saying, well, I had one and the quality of it was blah, blah, blah. Or I had a really good or really bad. Or I hear great things, or I hear bad things, or I hear very inconsistent things, whatever. Don't worry about it. Just buy the flavor that you want. And then make the guitar yours. You know what I mean? Just know that it's possible that you could get a really good one and it will be great and it'll be awesome and you will have saved a bunch of money. Or you could get one that, needs to go to your tech and needs some frets filed off and stuff, When you get up into, more expensive guitars, then you can expect more from the instrument, right? Obviously, because you're spending more money and they're allegedly from more reputable places. This Silver Sky SE that I just got, I believe that I am justified in being disappointed in the downturn in quality of that instrument, because the instrument that I got before from the same factory was better. And I can tell by looking at the guitar, I've done this a couple times, and I can tell by looking at the guitar that it was not from temperature. I can tell that it was from lack of attention to detail. There's a difference. And sometimes you can chalk it up to it's traveled a long way and the thing's dried out and it sucks. And, okay, just fix the frets. But I actually fixed the frets on that guitar today, and I will tell you it was not from that. It was from a lack of attention to detail. It took me quite a while to fix that guitar. And when I say quite a while, I mean a half an hour. Usually I spend 5 or 10 minutes doing it, but this one took about a half hour, 45 minutes to fix up today. I did shoot it. It's going to come out in a video because I'm going to show you how we did it. But that's a guitar, at $800 or $900. I paid $912 with that thing for tax, with tax. I'm a little disappointed that I had to do some stuff to it. If it was one of these Squires that came from Asia, that was $500, or if it was some Yamaha Pacifica for $300, or if it was some Harley Benton for $75, or if it was whatever, any of these cheap guitars, I don't care, because that's what you get. But when you get up into the, $800, I think when the guitar it claims to have a certain level of quality, like PRS does, then you kind of want it to be that way, right? I mean, that's what you expect. Then again, handmade stuff is handmade. So, yeah, and this is not to say that inexpensive guitars are bad. Obviously, I'm trying to advocate for them, but just put them in their proper place and just kind of set expectations, if that makes sense. I think a lot of people spend way too much time forum hopping and stuff concerned about a $400 guitar. Just buy the damn thing and play it. And if you don't like it, upgrade it. Do some work to it. Don't stress about it. Like, if I get this guitar, how are the frets on it? Did you buy one? You're not going to be able to know, because was it Thursday or was it Monday that the guitar was built? And was, that kind of thing. Those are the kind of things. So that's what I would worry about. All things being equal, what order would you do upgrades on those lower end guitars? Number 1, get the guitar playable. Make sure that the frets are good and make sure that the setup is good. Once that's done, play the guitar until you're not happy with it anymore. And if you really enjoy how the guitar plays, then maybe put some pickups in it. But first and foremost, even before pickups, before anything else, get the guitar playing well. Make sure that the frets are flat. Make sure you don't have any buzzes, and make sure that the thing just plays great. That's what I would do. I've noticed that the guitar crowd is worse than the gun guys when it comes to brands. I didn't think I'd ever see that. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I'll own any kind of, but I'm in a different kind of crowd. I will own all of them. There's Gibson guys and Fender guys and whatever, and I'm sure there's Sig Sauer guys and Glock guys, and there's definitely Glock guys. But in any of those departments, I don't care. I'll buy anything, whatever. It doesn't matter. I want to try all of the things. You would think that people would be picky about food and drink as they are about their guitars. Amen, brother. Amen to that. I've run into issues on a $1,600 Mexican-made Martin. So here's an interesting thing. And we might get into this in future. Isn't that what QC is for, which is the whole goal of a PRS style exclusive factory? Yes, it is. And I think they've fallen off a little bit. And I would assume that they'll pick it right back up. I have confidence in them. They're usually pretty good at that. But yeah, I would say you're exactly right. And if I was you, or not you, I don't want to speak for you, but if I was an average consumer buying a PRS Silver Sky, I would have returned that guitar. The only reason I did not, and I want to make this clear because a lot of people get on me like, well, you tell people to return guitars if there's something wrong with them to hold the retailer accountable. Yes, I do. And I think you should. But there is a balancing act here too. So there's a couple things that I have that most people don't have. One is I have a good reason to keep it and to do the repairs on it, to show other people how to do the repairs, right? Like I'm using it as an example, like as a teaching example, as a training example, because there is a balancing act to it. Because if you get a guitar and it's got one or two bad, these frets are a little sharp, isn't it easier just to grab your little StuMac file and just go and it's done, then pack it all up in the box, return it, wait a week, get back, maybe the other one's worse than the one you return. You know what I mean? So there's a balancing act to that. So you got to be reasonable, obviously. I think a lot of people are not very reasonable about this stuff, and they get really worked up in in like Facebook forums and stuff like that, when in reality, a $15 file and a 20 minutes worth of work is way easier than the 20 minutes it takes you to drive the thing to UPS again. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Like there's a balance to it. Now I did have a Gibson acoustic show up with a broken brace. Obviously I could fix that, but that guitar came broken. So we're going to return, so we returned it. So I think there's some balance to that. But overall, and then the other thing is to be able to discern, and this is what most people in YouTube comments and Facebook groups get wrong. The difference between quality control issues and things that are just guitar setup, because, and I'm just going to say it, I'm just going to say it, moment. Guitar setup is not quality control. Okay. So all you people in the back, I'm going to say this again. If your guitar does not come set up in the box, that is not bad quality control. Let me say it again, or did you get it? And I know that sounds very condescending, but it's the number one thing that annoys me about guitar players right now in the moment. The reason I'm saying that is all guitar brands have a baseline setup that is, if it falls within these tolerances it ships. And those tolerances are far wider than most guitar players prefer on their own instruments. So if you get a guitar and it does not what's the word I'm looking for? It does not consider the travel and the humidity change and etc. So if I order a guitar from Corona, California right now, and I get it in Georgia, it is so humid here that it's like foggy during the day. Okay. That tells me that that neck is going to be swollen and I'm going to have a bunch of fret buzzes. That is not Fender's fault. Okay. Now, discerning the difference between guitar setup and quality control is very important, and most guitar players get it wrong. If the frets are a little sharp on the edges because the guitar has dried out some, let's say you order a Sweetwater guitar and you go to Arizona and the thing starts to dry out because it's been sitting in a UPS warehouse, right? Or whatever. And the frets are a little sharp. Is it because the frets were clipped improperly, like it was on this Silver Sky PRS? Or is it because the neck has shrunk a little bit and if you let it sit around your house, it'll go away? Like on my Epiphone Explorer that I got a few weeks ago. Had a couple of sharp frets, but in 3 days they were gone. If the action is too high, if you get fret buzzes because the neck relief is not right, if the intonation is not correct, all those things have nothing to do with quality control. They have to do with guitar setup, and that is your job. That is not the manufacturer's job. Now, if the frets aren't flat, if it's got popped up frets and then yes, that's correct. But 99.9% of the time when I hear somebody complaining about quality control, it is setup, and it is something that needs to be done by a qualified guitar tech after the guitar gets to the customer. It has nothing to do with the manufacturer whatsoever. But does setup include quality control? If I pay Sweetwater to do a setup on my guitar, should they find a gouge in the finish and choose a different guitar from stock? Okay, so let's break that down. Does setup include quality control? If I pay Sweetwater to do a setup, if you pay Sweetwater to do a setup, that is not their 55-point inspection. That's something completely different. And yes, if there's a gouge in the finish, they should catch that and you should return it. I 100% agree. But yeah, setup is on the user. It's one of those things that I really struggle with. An extra half-hour labor cost in Indonesia to get it right won't come close to breaking the company's profits. Here's the problem with that logic, Rusty, is you're not thinking about scale. So if you're trying to build 500 guitars a day and you add a half an hour to every guitar, then that's 250 hours. Then that is 6 weeks almost of 40-hour weeks. You see what I'm saying? That doesn't scale. Do you happen to know if the Stratosonic has a conversion neck? I do not happen to know that. I do not know. I do not know. Quality control is the factory's job. Preparing for supply to the customer is the dealer's job. Yes. However, that still does not put setup on the dealer. Because the dealer doesn't know. Sweetwater doesn't know. When I order a guitar, okay, they might know me because I'm on the internet all the time. But I guarantee you, they do not know how I like my guitar setup. So, One of the things that I've been doing on all of my Sweetwater guitar, because I buy most of my stuff from Sweetwater, is when I get them, I check to see if the setup is within the manufacturer's specs. And you know what? It always is. Is it up to my specs? No. I mess with every guitar once it gets here. I mess with everyone. There's something, I don't want to say there's something wrong, but there's something I don't like that I want to improve upon the setup of the guitar with every single guitar that comes in here, except for my McPherson's. They're always perfect. But every Sweetwater guitar needs some work because I like my action a certain way, and the guy at Sweetwater doesn't know how you like your guitar. But the thing I will say is every guitar that I get from Sweetwater is within factory spec of what each of the manufacturers choose for their guitars. Because, and here's the other thing. If you get a guitar that's kind of crappy from Sweetwater, that's not because they let it pass. That's because they have a sheet that says this is the manufacturer tolerances. And if it's within this, then send it to the customer. If it's not within the manufacturer's tolerances, then send it back to us for a return. So there's a lot more that goes into it than there's a lot more that goes into that than just than what people think. I think people think they get a guitar and it's not perfect, and then all of a sudden they're bent out of shape and they have to blame somebody. But when it really comes down to it, it's a person making a thing. It's a person. It's not a machine making a thing. You know, CNC Time is a very small percentage of how a guitar is made. And all the things that we care about as humans on the instrument are done by humans. So there's going to be tolerance to that. What I find funny about all of the quality experts, I like this comment. Hang on. All of the quality experts will say quality is free. It's cheaper to build it right the first time than it is to rework. I like that comment, and here's why. Because you're wrong. And here's why. You're right and you're wrong. I get why you're saying it. Let me say you're right, first of all. You're right. Build it right the first time, right? Obviously. Build it right the first time. Don't do it twice. That's cheaper than doing it twice. Amen. 100% totally agree. However, this is a great segue because it leads me into my next thing. People will complain that all these guitars have no soul because they're made on a machine now. And people will complain about imperfections in guitars. Here's the thing. Imperfections come from when a human touches a guitar. Machines will make a guitar pretty much perfect every time. The imperfections come from humans touching guitars. So whether that is a Gibson with some sanding marks on some binding, whether that's a tape line that's a little bit off on some binding, whether that's a dull spot in the finish, that needs to be buffed a little more. Maybe the nut isn't 100% perfect and it's got to need a couple little, to make it right. Because let's face it, most of these guitars are that close. They're not usually terrible. All those things are where the human interfaces with the guitar and mistakes can be made. Machines don't make those mistakes. Machines go to a perfect program that is programmed by a human being, but the scalability of that is perfect. The reason you pay $5,000 for a custom built guitar, or what you pay $12,000 for a Fender master built guitar that you won't have any of these problems with, is because time doesn't scale. So you literally have to spend the time doing the thing by hand, and that money has to come from somewhere. And so when you add, we've talked about it with PRS before. So uh SE guitars, a lot of times the rear control cavity plates will not be flushed into the guitar. They'll sit on top. Squires are the same way. They won't be flushed into the guitar. They'll sit on top. Well, that's because that would take an extra 2 minutes on the CNC machine, which means that the cycle time for that guitar would be this much longer. And then there would also be other processes down the line that cascade from that. So you would have a lengthening of production time of that guitar. Well, when you scale that times 500 a day or 700 a day or however many, and you're trying to build a guitar for $429, you cannot do that. Same thing with people. A person can only spend X amount of minutes doing the fret ends on a Squire for every guitar. Simple as that. Well, they could just spend an extra blah, 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 and it's not going to cost them much because labor's cheap and it would be done the first time. But the extension of the time of the production of the guitar would make the guitar more expensive. So do you want prices to go up? Because they're going to go up with inflation and all that stuff. Or do you want the guitar to be better, but the prices will also go up for that too? You can't get something for nothing. So there you go. What about the tree fairies? And one of the things, and this is why I want to talk about all this stuff, is because this kind of bin full of cheap guitars under $500, that's kind of why they're all the same. Don't worry about it. Just buy one and play it. Enjoy it. Just really enjoy the thing. And if you don't, then don't feel bad about modding it because you didn't spend that much money for it anyway. And you know what? Honestly, that's not even fair to say, because if you're somebody who had to save up $500 to buy a guitar, then just get the one you want. Don't worry about, is this Chinese guitar better than that Chinese guitar? Just get the one that looks cool and makes you feel good, especially if you're somebody that has to save up for a $500 guitar because you want to value that thing and you want to enjoy it. You know what I mean? That's why I think it's so important to talk about this stuff, because people just overthink all of it way too much. Labor is cheap if you don't value your time. Exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing about guitar players is they don't, in these conversations anyway, is they don't value the time that it takes to make an instrument. You know, if you were to come out to Texas Toast Guitars and build a guitar in one of their classes, you would never complain about it again. Understanding what it takes to build an instrument is, you know, and you can say, well, yeah, but I watched the Gibson factory tour on Premier Guitar, or I watched it just goes through them. No, it doesn't. First of all, yeah, okay, so it goes through a machine, but you know they cost $250,000 and they got like 12 of them. So somebody's got to maintain those. The tooling for those things, one bit for those things can be like $600. And that thing only lasts so long, and then they have to get a new one. You know, nothing just, you don't just put it in, we're not just printing guitars here. There are consumable things. There are things that need to be maintained. There are things that need to be bought. Costs that we as consumers do not see when we watch a video about how a guitar is made or whatever, or anything, or any kind of, you know, well, there's just a machine just puts a cell phone together. It shouldn't be $1,000. Well, you know how much that machine costs? Like, you know, yeah. Super interesting to think about. It's not just the labor, it's the experience. You're also paying for decades of trial and error. Yeah, that's another thing too. I think about that a lot because people ask me why my pickups cost what they cost, and I'm like, well, you're not paying for the hour and a half that I sit. Like today I made some humbuckers, and I don't know what did it take me, an hour and a half or so. And you'd be like, well, that's a whole lot of money, and it's only however many dollars worth of parts. Okay, yes, you're right, but I've been doing it for 10 years, and they're right, and they're good, and I also have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment to make it happen. We're not doing this with an old sewing machine over here. You know what I mean? So the investment of expertise and time and education is a thing that's important too. And I wouldn't disrespect you that way. I don't know what you all do for a living, but let's say I needed my sprinklers fixed in my yard. I wouldn't be like, why does it cost me $75 an hour for you to replace a sprinkler head and, reset up my timer? It shouldn't cost me $150 for that. You're only here for 45 minutes. I don't know how to do it. Like, I don't know how to do it. You know how to do it. You spent the time. I don't know how to service a hot tub. I don't know. I guess maybe I kind of do. But whatever expertise that you have that I don't have, I don't know how to do it. And I'm not going to disrespect your trade by, saying, well, you were only fixing my printer for 10 minutes. I don't know. It cost me $100. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing with the guitar stuff. It's like, just because we can hit a button on Sweetwater and it shows up in 2 days, doesn't mean that the thing's going to be perfect every time. And it doesn't mean that, there's not a lot more than that goes into that. So, I think it's an interesting thought process to go through, especially when we're talking about the less expensive guitars. Because without, of course I don't get into politics on this channel, but when we start talking about where this stuff is made and, working conditions and all those sorts of things, you could get in a whole rabbit hole of, do you even want to support a company that sells a $200 guitar? Because that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? So there's all kinds of reasons to have these conversations. I charge a lot for my time. No discounts here. I agree. That's why we don't have a whole lot of sales, because working more for less doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't. And I wouldn't expect you. And I'm not one of these people I'm not going to call you up and be like, hey man, I need a new set of tires. Or I need, I'm only going to buy from you when something's on sale. I don't do that to you. So I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't expect anybody to do it to me either. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's just a respect thing. And I think for me too, that's the thing about the guitar stuff, like buying a guitar. Ooh, it's thundering and lightning outside. I respect the time that goes into it. I know what goes into it, and supply chain and all that kind of stuff. And I ordered a guitar. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's on the way. Or, well, I don't know if it's on the way yet or not. It's on back order. It's like months that I've been waiting for this thing. And I'm not mad about it because I know what it takes. So I don't get upset when I order a guitar and it's like, well, it's going to be 4 months. Ah, crap. Okay, well, I guess that's the way it is, and put you off another week, and I guess that's the way it is, because stuff's hard to get. And Les Paul's just went up another $200, so a Les Paul standard is $29.99 now. Well, I paid $4.10 for gas the other day. I guess it is what it is. Like, just because you can't say we're in the 70s anymore. Well, back in my day, it cost blah, blah. Well, with inflation, it costs the same amount of money, probably. Pretty close. So, I just don't complain about that stuff. Poor Chris. Matt looks like a slave driver. He is not. Matt is one of the kindest, most awesome people you'll ever meet. He is hilarious and he is really outspoken, but he is a very kind fellow. He's one of my favorite human beings, actually, ever. In my opinion, Dylan pickups are a bargain. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Yep. Kind of fun. This stuff's kind of fun. Let's see if we've run through any questions here that I missed while we finish up the old. Yeah, if you have any guitar questions, you can put it in there. Super chats will drop what we're doing and answer them right away. Are your PJ pickups similar to the Seymour Duncan quarter pounder for bass? No, they're very vintage style. Let's see. Back in the 70s, there was no gas. That is a great point. Yeah, we have it pretty good right now. And to tell you the truth, all of this aside, not to pull it back in my day, but if you spend $400 on a guitar and you get a couple of sharp frets, let me tell you, that's still a dang good guitar. I mean, student and entry-level instruments have not always been as good as they are now. We actually live in as much as people want to complain about price and stuff going up, but everything's going up. Life is just going up. Like, life is going up. So let's just call it that. So why shouldn't expendable income items go up too? All life is going up. So I don't care. You just got to do what you got to do. But it's always happened through history. But we live in the best time ever for musical instruments, because no matter how much you choose to spend for an instrument, you will get a good one. And it has not always been like that. If you want to spend $5,000, you'll get a good guitar. If you want to spend $349, you can get a good guitar. Will you have to be a little more flexible with what you do and how you make that guitar good at $349? Probably. But the neck will be straight, probably, and it will stay in tune, probably, and it will have all its parts, probably, and most of the time all the pots will work. Like, it's not always been like that. Really entry-level stuff has been bad in the past. So, we can be. Your Enduro versus hum size P90. Those are two different animals. If you like a really single coil sound, get the Enduro. If you like more of a P90 sound, get the other one. Yeah, I mean, life is actually pretty good. I know stuff is getting more expensive, but it was getting more expensive last year. It was getting more expensive the year before. It's going to always do that, and we'll always have to figure out ways to make that work, obviously, but I don't know. I'd rather just enjoy what we're doing right now and not think about it that much. Cool. You guys, this has been fun. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And I appreciate you all hanging out and listening to the Just Gonna Say It podcast. Thanks for listening to the gear news at the front of this thing. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters, patreon.com/DylanTalksTone. And let's see. I guess our next video will be Friday. That's going to be another Silver Sky video, trying to fix a couple of those problems with that guitar. Fret end dressing with a file and etc. There'll be links to all the stuff we talked about in the news. They're in the description below. You should check out those $150 TC electronic pedals. I think those are going to be pretty awesome. And yeah, there you go. Thanks for hanging out, and I guess we will see you tomorrow night for our live stream.